Colleagues, welcome back to the office and to our presentation and podcast for today. This is Hidden Secrets of Microsoft Power BI Part 2. This is the second installment in our series where we're looking at Power BI, this incredible tool that we can use for all sorts of data visualization, dashboard, business intelligence, and more. In the first episode of this class, we looked at getting our data into Power BI. Lots of different opportunities, but what we really learned is that Power BI is really intended to be a reporting tool, not really an authorship tool. You would use, for example, tools such as a database or an API or Microsoft Excel even to get your data in there. But really, Power BI is designed to take that data, dynamically produce whatever type of report you might need for it. And in today's course, we're going to build upon that knowledge. We're going to talk about some of the other best practices and hidden secrets of this incredible tool. We'll talk a little bit about, for example, the different apps that are available from Power BI. I'll show you, for example, where you can add additional components and third-party tools to Power BI. There's a couple different app stores as well as third-party integration tools, including from services such as QuickBooks or Marketo and other tools such as that really can kind of help round out your Power BI dashboards, providing insight from those additional cloud services that you're using. We'll talk about a little bit with using Power BI effectively. I'll show you where some of the formatting best practices can be. For example, when to use certain tools such as conditional formatting, how to customize the colors and the scales, how to use themes. We're going to talk a little bit about row-level security, and I'm going to be upfront with you with respect to row-level security, or RLS. I'm really just going to try to make you aware of that feature and function. It's definitely a more power-focused feature of Power BI, but as a financial professional, you're probably going to be authoring reports not just for yourself, but for other people, and you might want to limit the scope of a report so that it doesn't, for example, allow people who shouldn't see certain things to see what they shouldn't have access to. Think of, for example, a standard employee having access to the same, let's say, scope of data as the CEO. You probably don't want that. So with RLS, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to limit the scope of a report based off of the distinguishing characteristics of the data. So if you want to, for example, take a report and only make it available to, the CEO or the manager or director, I'll show you how to use this tool. But I'm really going to be upfront. It's probably going to be a tool you're going to struggle with, and it's going to be something you're going to need to review on your own and sit with, and probably do a couple of different examples before you really kind of understand how that tool is used and where you would use it. We're going to talk also about creating calculations inside of Power BI. There's this feature called DAX, Data Analysis Expressions. Now, DAX is the language of Power BI. It's how we write calculations inside of Power BI. And I'll also point out DAX is used not only for Power BI, but Power Pivot in Excel. So Power Pivot is despite its name, is not a pivot table tool, but rather a data modeling tool. And it's a way that we're able to hook Excel up to bigger, larger database-driven data sets and produce pivot tables or whatever else we might need. But DAX is the language of how we manipulate it. So one of the cool things is that if you are using DAX inside of Power BI, you can also use it in Excel and vice versa. They're 100% the same language. So I'm going to introduce this topic to you, what it looks like to write formulas inside of inside of Power BI, but that knowledge can also be used inside of Excel as well. Now in Power BI, we use it for calculated measures and columns. We'll talk about what both those tools are, and this is how you create different calculations in the data view to create measures, to create goals, to do whatever you might need to do in terms of manipulation of the information. You're going to use that DAX formula language for it. So we'll talk a little bit about DAX. I'll give you a couple of different examples, how to create calculated columns, how to create calculated rows, and what that might look like. Now, we'll finish with a couple of additional kind of bleeding edge features from Power BI, including Q&A, which allows your organization to ask questions to the data and have it generate automatically visualizations for you. We'll talk a little bit about what it looks like to use Power BI in the context of Microsoft Teams, Microsoft's incredible communication tool, and really the hub of the modern office in terms of how we talk and communicate. And we'll also talk about some of the additional preview features that they're adding. Microsoft adds new features and functions to Power BI pretty much every month. And so where can you access these features and get them turned on? And I'll leave you with a few of resources from Microsoft so that you can continue your knowledge and grow your capabilities with this incredible application. Now, all that and more in our podcast for today, and we're going to get started here just in a minute, but I do have a couple of housekeeping announcements, and then we'll go ahead and roll through our class. So if you are watching live today, thank you so much for being here. And please know that you can ask questions at any given time. So if you have a question or comment, please go ahead and use the chat or Q&A box and ask your questions. For those attending live, we're going to confirm your attendance through polling questions. There will be 4 for this class. They'll come up about every 12 to 20 minutes, and there'll be a slide, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Just pick a response that you most agree with. It doesn't matter what you choose. Just choose something, as that confirms your attendance. Now, as long as you have responded to 75% of the polling prompts, you will receive full credit, and you will get a CPE certificate that will be delivered to you by email within 2 business days, but more often than not, it will be there later today. If you have any issues with your certificate, please reach out at CPE today. There will be an evaluation at the end of our course. Love for you to know what you thought of today's class. If you wouldn't mind just budgeting a couple extra minutes at the end to let us know what you think, we would appreciate it. We use your feedback to write more and better content. And as a reminder, again, if you have any issues or questions, just ask questions. We are here, chat, Q&A, wherever you feel like you can reach out to us there. Now, for those of you who are watching after the fact, either through our podcast or YouTube, Facebook, somewhere else, if you'd like to receive credits for today, you'll do it as a self-study class. Head on over to cpetoday.com. Our course code today is GSP2. You'll take a short 5-question quiz, and you'll earn a credit for today's class. Alrighty. And for everybody, if you're a new watcher or listener, please have a class and have a credit on us. Whether it's this class or another class, if you're choosing, you can use one free podcast at checkout and get a free CPE credit of your choice. Alrighty. And one last little bit of housekeeping for you. We are going to be using some different sample files. And for those of you who have purchased the course, you can download those in your CPE Today portal. And you can also download some of these classes, some of these sample files directly from Microsoft. I'm going to go ahead and put the links up here so you can download those. And what these are just sample databases, sample Power BI files. If you like, you can follow along and you can use these files. And again, if you are attending live, they are part of your portal. You can just download those. And we'll be working with the PIBX file for Northwind database mostly today. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and get into it. Alrighty. So the next hidden secret that I want to tell you about is the third-party integrations, which are the get data features that offer pre-built connections to popular applications, Google Analytics, QuickBooks Online, and more. These are just point-and-click integrations. They really don't require you to do much of anything other than just have the password to be able to log in and access these tools. And assuming you've got the correct privileges, once you click, yes, and you provide username and password, these will just pretty much work right off the bat. Okay. Now, there's lots of different tools that support Power BI, and Power BI is becoming, I think, in a lot of ways, the de facto product that a lot of people are using for their business intelligence and reporting. And so you'll find a lot of the common things that you would normally use inside a business. A lot of your bigger products, for example, are represented, including things like Microsoft Azure, Dynamics 365, Teams, and Exchange. Now, Microsoft, obviously, they make Power BI, so they've gone ahead and added a lot of those applications and platforms right in here. But there's other tools as well: Salesforce, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, even QBO, Twilio, which is a communication tool, Zendesk, which is for customer support, and more. And you can really do some compelling things with these applications. And why don't we go ahead and just quickly show you where you would access those tools. All right, inside of Power BI on our Home tab here in the upper left, okay, we're going to go ahead and just click this Get Data right in the middle of it. It's going to load up a little window right here. And this is going to be where you can access all of those different third-party connectors. So you'll see over here, if we come over down to online services, we'll see a lot of, again, non-Microsoft stuff like Salesforce or Google. But let's just take a quick look at QBO because that's probably the most applicable for the folks here. Okay, we click QBO, we click this connect button. Okay, it's going to tell you it's a preview connector, but just as a heads up, they've been using this connector for well over 5 years now, so I don't expect it to go away anytime soon. And once you're authenticated, and I already did that ahead of time, I just plopped in my username and password here, you'll see that you just have access to all of the tables that are present inside of QuickBooks Online. So if you wanted to go and you wanted to grab, for example, let's say your customers, okay, here's your customer table. It's just going to go ahead and grab that data for you, and you can just load this straight away into your project. Okay, let me show you one where you do have to log in just because I've so you can see what those screens look like. Let's just say we were supposed to be using, and let's just say we were using, let's say Zendesk for customer support. Okay, so we'll come back over here, get data, online services, Zendesk. And if it's a new one that you haven't connected to before, all you're going to have to do is plop in your URL. So it could be, for example, let's just say cpetoday.zendesk.com. Okay. The next screen will pop up and it will ask you to sign into that particular service. You know, you'd plop in your username and password, and that would be it. And then once you click connect, it will show the get data table screen again. You can just select whatever data that you would like to see present. But what you can end up doing here is that you can create, you know, as many different connections to as many different data sources on a per report basis as needed, and then be able to look cross-functionally between, you know, for example, your accounting data from QuickBooks and maybe your website analytic data from Google. Okay, most folks don't do that. They really should, because you can gain a lot of efficiency and effectiveness in your reporting by not being tethered to the traditional way that reporting is done for compliance, like an income statement or balance sheet driven report. Now you can actually produce the information that maybe can really help management make decisions and get letters. Or I'm sorry, not get letters, but get the information that they need. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and come back here, and why don't we have a review question, get a little ahead of these review questions for today. Alrighty, which of the third-party tools can share data with Power BI with point-and-click integration? Alrighty, is it accounting tools like QuickBooks Online, Xero, Dynamics 365? Yes, it is. Is it website analytic tools like Google, Adobe, Salesforce Reports, and more? You betcha. Is it ERP and CRM applications like Zoho, eWay, Marketo? Yes, it is. Correct answer here is all of the above. Okay, so you can use all these different tools and more in your Power BI reports. Alrighty, so in our next section, let's go ahead and talk about leveraging Power BI effectively. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about formatting tips and tricks, and we'll create just a couple of simple charts and graphs to give you some familiarity with it. Okay, and let's also talk about how we can secure our reports using RLS, row level security. Again, that's more of an advanced topic, but I want to make you just generally aware of what RLS is and where you can find it. Let's talk about modifying our data and creating new calculations using data analysis expressions, or DAX. DAX is that formula language for working with data models, working for databases, where we can do pretty much anything that we would want. And with that kind of power, we can create calculations that are not present in the underlying application itself, or even under the underlying data. So that's really useful if we needed to do sums, calculations, counts, whatever that might end up being. But we will use this quite often to create summaries, to create new columns, whatever else we might do to produce, you know, kind of like let's call it like an aggregation field, so that we can use that inside of a chart, a graph, or whatever else we might need. Alrighty, and then towards the end, we'll talk about some of these preview features, the App Store that's in Power BI, and I'll also give you a little bit of insight on that Power Automate and Power Apps as well. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk about formatting best practices. All right, so the first hidden secret that you need to know is permissions need to be present in the report to do certain things in the report. So for example, in a report, you could just have a viewer. You can also have an editor. Okay, in order to be able to make changes inside of the actual PIBX file, especially once it's published up to the Power BI service, need to make sure that you have edit permissions. Okay, with those edit permissions, you can do some whatever type of changes you might need to the report. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, assuming you've got those edit privileges, are applying a theme to the entire report. Let's go ahead and switch over to Power BI and take a look at what that means. Okay, so we're in our Northwind sample database report that we have listed here. And if we switch over here to the view section, you'll see that you have themes listed here in the upper left-hand corner, okay? And what themes are is that they control the macro level styling of the report itself. And there are a lot of different themes that you can choose from, okay? And themes are really kind of useful because in a click, you can immediately adjust the visual appearance of the actual report itself. And you could set these up to match your existing company's let's say brand standards. You know, maybe your company, for example, has a specific color of blue or red or font that you use. And often you find yourself across different applications having to go and constantly set those correct, you know, colors, fonts, and so on and so forth. Well, what you can do is you can actually set this thing up as a theme, okay? You could take an existing theme and you can modify it, or you can create your own theme from scratch and then save it and then make that theme available to the different Microsoft applications that you're using, you know, and then instead of having to constantly check and change and update fonts and colors and things of this nature, it's kind of all set at that one level and it spills down to every other part of the report. So it could be the colors for the bar charts, the pie charts, the maps, the fonts, whatever else you might need, but it's essentially all managed in one little spot. And from that one little spot, it can instantly update a report to work and look the way you want it to look. Now in here, if we click this little drop-down menu on the left-hand side here, a couple of options. You can browse for themes. You can, so if you've got a file, we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, you get your theme gallery. You can also choose customize this current theme, save this current theme, as well as some information on how to create one. So if we choose this customize current theme, okay, and we select this is going to pop up this little theme editor here where we can give it the, let's say, the name that we would like it to be, the various colors that we want it to use. If we come over here to text, this is going to be where we can adjust the font, size, color, you know, so on and so forth, and default all those options so that we don't have to individually change every single visualization that we'd like, okay? Likewise for our page and filter panes as well. You know, so if I wanted to come up here and, you know, adjust this, I would usually create a copy of the existing theme that I'm working with and then modify that copy of that theme rather than change the default theme for the app. Generally, that works better. And you'll see up here, it's even telling you like, hey, you need to update and pick the correct theme, and then you can go ahead and make those changes for you. Now, one other thing I wanted to show you with respect to themes is that it's not just a Power BI thing. If we come into Word as an example and come over here and create a new document, and we come up to our design tab inside of Word, okay, you're going to see themes are also present inside of here, and there's all these themes as well. So one of the cool things is that when you create a theme, you can also share that to the other Office applications. Likewise with Excel, PowerPoint, trust me, it's there. That's a really useful thing that unfortunately not enough people actually use. Okay, so that's something you keep in mind. If you are constantly having to adjust the visual appearance of the report, that theme can really save you a lot of effort because you could save all of that and then it will be consistent, not only in Power BI, but also consistent with respect to every other Office application that you're using. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about here are some of the styling options inside of Power BI as well, changing the color for single data points. And we'll also talk about conditional formatting here, the numeric value and the field value. Okay. And we'll also talk about some of the other colors and styling options inside of the actual visualizations that you're choosing to use. So let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. Alrighty, so let's switch back over here to Power BI. Close up Excel and Word. Okay, so let's just go ahead and open up a new page here, and let's just look at what it looks like to create a visualization, and then I'll show you some of the layout and coloring options that you can choose to do. Okay, now this is assuming you've already got your data right. You've got your data model set up. You've got everything kind of configured. What does it look like to actually create a visualization inside of Power BI? Okay, well, I'll tell you how I actually do it. So the way that I actually do it is I will usually have these three filters, these three panes open: the filters, the visualizations, and the fields. And the first question that usually comes to mind for me is like, well, what am I looking to do? Am I looking to sum? Am I looking to count? Am I looking to do whatever? But like, where does the actual data live? Okay, well, in this particular case, let's say we wanted to do a sum of sales by product. Well, for us, we're going to come on over here to our order details. From our order details, we're going to choose our extended price, which is quantity times price. I'm going to show you how to make that calculation here in a minute, so bear with me if you don't see that in your version. Okay, and you'll see here right away, it just kind of creates a single thing. In this case, it's the sum of all orders, and we can see it's somewhere around $70,000. Okay, well, if we wanted to provide some context, which we would want to, we would come back over here to our products, and we would choose how we'd want to understand this data. So if we choose product name as an example here, we can now see that this in fact is showing us an entire breakdown of our orders by specific products listed. Okay, now from these different visualizations, you can choose how this should look in field. And in fact, why don't we not choose product name? Let's make this a little bit easier to understand. Let's choose product category. Less options to see. Okay. Now, once that's created, I like to personally start with the data being in a table because I think it's easier to understand. Okay. And let me show you the first hidden trick. You can change the visualization on the fly for whatever you'd like it to be. So if you want to change it from a table or a bar chart to, for example, a funnel, or you wanted to do a dot chart or a pie chart, know that you can always do that. And as long as the data has math inside of it, in this case, the extended price, you can change that visualization on the fly really quickly and easily. Now, some visualizations won't make sense. Like I can't visualize this on a map here, but because there's no geodata, but as long as we have like a geodata, we could use that visualization. So visualizations can be changed easily. You shouldn't be tied to anything. Personally, though, I almost always start either with the table or bar chart because I find that to be easy to use. So let me show you something kind of cool here in our table view. Okay. And this will also kind of bring us into where our styling is listed. So we've got our table set up over here. All right. So the next one is, where do you actually go to visualize something and change something? Well, the actual answer is going to be over here. They've since moved it now. You've got these three little buttons that are up top here under your visualization section. The first one is going to be to build your visualization, to work with the data. The next one is going to be over here under the format. And this is going to be where you can go and you could change how everything ultimately ends up looking, like the width of the columns, the size of the values. So if I wanted to, for example, bump this up and make this a little bit bigger, we can go ahead and do that here. Okay. So that is where we're going to go have to find those visualizations. They're going to be in this little format visualization section. Now, there's lots of different options when it comes to visualizing these things. You can get extremely granular, like we can just style our headers or just style the data rows itself. There's lots of options. I recommend personally keep everything in auto, and then you, as much as possible, control these things at the theme level, because monkeying with each one of these visualizations can be quite a lot of work. Okay. Now here's a kind of a cool one that most folks don't know. Okay. This is the ability to do conditional formatting. Let's go ahead and switch the order of these things here. And so we've got our beverages, we can see that that's the top price here. We can see all the other products that are listed as well. And what's nice when we kind of order these things top to bottom, I mean, they'll put them in the correct order, but sometimes using conditional formatting can be really helpful, because with conditional formatting, the data presentation will update depending on what the data looks like. Okay. So if we come on over here to our extended price and we click this little drop down menu, okay, and from this little drop down menu, you'll see there's an option here that says conditional formatting. Okay, and from that conditional formatting, we can change the background color, the font color, we can add a data bar, icons, so on and so forth. And depending on what the value is, we'll change the visual appearance of this. So as an example, let's just pick really easy here. Let's just do data bars, and we're just going to go ahead and choose the default options here. Okay, depending on the size of that data, we will see the appropriate bar going across. And so the data here, beverages is so much larger than everything else, but we can see visually from that little data bar what and how large that one column is. Okay, if we come back over here to our extended price and we go ahead and remove our conditional formatting, we can look at some other ones. And we can also get really specific about how the formatting is applied. So if we, for example, come on over here, conditional formatting, and then choose, let's say, icons. All right, give this a thing to pop up. Alrighty. And we can then choose what icons appear. And so we've got little it could be stoplights, it could be flags, it could be whatever we want. And so we could say, for example, if it's from the 0, the bottom third, make it red. If it is in the middle third, go ahead and make it yellow. If it's in the top third, make it green. Let's just give it a little bit more disparity here. Let's just say if it's in the top 10%, do that. And we'll take this up to 89. And we'll go ahead and click OK here. We can see still that data is still so large, but we can start to see that it is adding that iconography to it to make it really easy to be able to understand where things play. Okay, so in this particular example, maybe we would filter out, other items, and depending what our filter settings are, we would also see, for example, that conditional icon update correspondingly. So if it's in the top 10%, it'd be green. If it's in the bottom 10%, it would be red. Now we can also change this as well. So if we want to come back over here, okay, and we can adjust our conditional formatting or remove it. All right. And we can also, for example, just stylize something. So if we want to do our conditional formatting and we want to just make the font a particular color, we can do that as well. What's nice with this one is that it can set where the greenest of green is the highest of value, the reddest of red is the lowest value. We can add a middle color if we want here as an example. We'll click OK. And again, we can see those colors change. Now, if you got a little bit more disparity in your data where there's a little bit difference between high and low, you'll start to see some different colors pop up. But that can be really nice with respect to what you would see. Okay. Now, I like conditional formatting. I use it everywhere, especially for big stuff. It makes it really easy to be able to pull out your leaders and low producers without having to read every single line item. Alrighty. Now, over here, I also want to point out some of the other options with respect to numbers. So if we select a specific field here, and then we come over here to our visualization, one of the things that we can choose to do is, let's see, where are you? Style presets. No, that's not what I want. Okay, for our properties, position, Oh, let's come back over this way. All right, and... All right. So another thing I wanted to point out here is that you can change when you are, let me go ahead and remove our formatting options here. Okay. One of the other options that you can also do here is that you can also change how that math is being conducted. So let me just drop my camera picture here. And you can see by default, we're seeing a sum. If we ever wanted to, we can also, just like in a pivot table, change the way that the value is presented. So by default here, we could see that it's popping up with sum. If we wanted to, we could change that maybe to show the maximum, or we could change that, for example, to show a count so we could see frequency, so we can get a sense of how many sales are occurring in that different place. And another kind of cool thing is just, again, also like a pivot table, you can also pull down that value a second time. So if you wanted to show frequency and then price, you can do that as well, which is kind of nifty. So most folks don't know that you could bring the same column into that table more than once if you need to show a visualization in a different way. So pretty cool in terms of what you can do. Last thing over here, and it's still getting a little ahead of us, but since we're in that same position, you'll also see that there is this option here for quick measure. Okay. I want you to remember that because that's where that particular function ends up living. But with our quick measures, this is going to be where we can build in calculations, very similar to what we would do with Dax. We can build those in pretty much straight away. And they're kind of pre-built calculations. And that's how we access that specific area of functionality inside the application. So just remember, we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but just remember that is where that quick measure functionality lives in a few other places, but that's usually where I end up picking it up the most. Okay, so you got your styling options there. You got conditional formatting. Just be aware within your styling options, you can be very flexible with respect to how something looks, how something feels. You can change the visualization on the fly for this. And the intention is that you kind of create these different visualization panels and reports, kind of in a way that makes the most sense to you and the most sense to your audience. So if people like seeing bar charts or pie charts or whatever, you could do that right on the fly inside of Power BI. Alrighty, our next kind of hidden feature is going to be a security feature for Power BI. So with respect to Power BI, the traditional way that the application handled it was that whatever data was there was there. And if you had access to the report, you had access to all of the data contained inside of that report. And what is kind of frustrating, at the original way of using Power BI was that, well, just because you have access to the report doesn't mean you should have access to every single number or calculation inside of it. Okay. So the question I want you to think about is, if you ever wanted to have the same dashboard represent multiple types of users simultaneously, meaning I could create a dashboard for orders, but then limit what is displayed based off of who that user is. So maybe they're orders maybe we're in a retail environment. And so I would want to show the manager for the different departments. Maybe there's sports equipment, maybe there is consumer electronics, so on and so forth. But I would want to limit the manager of that particular department or business unit to only seeing the sales related to that specific department. Or let's say it's the same report, but it's an overview of the entire company and the dashboard of all the sales of a particular company. Okay. Well, we might want to make more information available at the executive level and less information, or maybe more aggregated information, more anonymized information at the lower tiers, so that, the executive sees what they need to see and they have all the explicit detail, but maybe people lower in the organization, they don't see and have that level of detail. Well, that's what we can do. And often the way that we most easily can handle this is directly through filters. Okay. So with row level security, what we do is we use a filter, a funnel, so data is available all the way up at the top, and we start to filter down to just what people should see. And they only see what they can actually interact with. And so that's what that RLS does, is it filters the data down based off of some sort of characteristic. So it could be the manager of a particular department, a leader of a particular business unit, or it could be a user only seeing their sales, their order. Now, filters, use them in the context of roles inside of Power BI. And so we define a role, manager, executive, staff, whatever, and then we associate different filters to that role. Okay. Now, RLS can be applied to the data models. It can be applied to the data sets. Lots of different things that we can use this with. However, I will point out it does not work for live connection data sets. Okay. So just about everything except that one option. Now, there are a couple issues that you should know with it. Cloud models have more limitation than on-premise models, meaning data that you're pulling down from the cloud. You're usually going to be limited to whatever that API can do. So if that cloud provider, for example, let's just take Google, let's pick on them, doesn't support, authenticated roles, well, there's really not much you can do. If it is your database, your information, you can be really granular with how you apply these models. Okay. Now, you have to use the desktop application, the Power BI desktop application, to create them. And then once you create the different roles and you create the different privileges, you publish them through Power BI to the cloud. And then it will ultimately, create that report that supports roles. Okay. But you have to do it on the local version of Power BI first. Okay. So I'm going to show you where that ultimately ends up living and how you would utilize that. Alrighty. So inside of our report here, Okay, we're going to come over here to our modeling section. And right here in the right-hand side of this, you'll see there's a security section. And this is going to be where you would define and use roles. So if we click on this Manage Roles section, this is going to be where we would ultimately find and define what our roles would be. Okay, so as an example here, let's create a role, and let's just say we're going to do this by city. Okay, as an example. So let's just say we've got different offices in different places, and we want to define what the Memphis office can see, or the Boise, or the Milwaukee, or New York, or whatever else might be required. Okay, we'd come on over here, we create our role, and for our example, let's just say we're going to use the great city of Memphis. And so we're going to say this role is for the Memphis office. Okay. So we're going to come over here, and then we need to define where it can define what Memphis actually is. And so what we would end up using would be in our, let's see, I think probably our order details. Let me see where that office lives actually. Let's see, what are we doing here? And, oh, we're getting into the customers. Okay, cool. So let's try that. All right, and we're going to say Memphis. Okay, and we're going to say that where... Come on. Okay, and we're going to say city, and notice I'm using square brackets here, equals Memphis. Okay, let's just double check, make sure that's correct. Alrighty, and we would do this for the other offices as well. So we'd say New York as an example. Okay, and we're using the information present on the actual table. So there is a table in here. Okay, and if you hit these three little buttons right here, this is where you can see the different fields. And so we could say where the city equals whatever. And so we could say city equals New York. Okay. Now, inside of Power BI, we would then associate our different users to these different roles. So we'd pick all the people in New York, we'd put them into the New York role, people all the way in Memphis, put them in the Memphis role, so on and so forth. And once these roles are created, and then we go ahead and assume a specific role. So let's say our New York role as an example here. Notice all the data drops away. They only see the information related to their specific entity, in this case, New York. Those other options go away. So you'll see that is a great way of kind of limiting the scope of what you should see in a particular report to whom that user is. Without having to create a whole bunch of separate reports, I've created one report, and that one report has everything inside of it. And then we just manage that depending on who that person is. So again, if you're for Memphis, we come in, we just see the information related. So imagine you take that away from, for example, your geographic locations you tie to level inside of the company. Well, now you've created one dashboard that can potentially serve multiple people. So that's a little bit RLS. It takes a little bit to get set up here, but once it's kind of set up, you'll fly, and it's a great way of improving the security in your report. Alrighty, next hidden secret, sensitivity labels. Okay, now sensitivity labels are something that are present throughout the entire Office ecosystem. It's just most folks don't use it. Now, what sensitivity labels do is they're a way to be able to identify potentially critical content inside of your organization and who should have access to that information. Okay. Now, what's really kind of cool with Power BI, you can indicate, for example, this dashboard contains critical critical important customer data, that has social security numbers or credit cards and things of this nature. And so you could say, hey, you know what, this is a highly confidential document. Or it could be something that is, for example, important but not mission critical. It could be like sales figures or reports or something like that. So you could give that maybe more of a confidential. Or if it is something anybody can know, you could just label it as general, public, or something else. But you can create different levels of content inside your organization and then classify that specific document as being at that level. And so what's really cool about this is that if the user is working with Power BI and then they export their report, maybe they export, a table to Excel, or maybe they create a PowerPoint presentation or a PDF, Well, the sensitivity label goes with the document. So you always know the provenance of where that information came from, which I think is pretty nifty from the context of just being able to know, is this data that I'm working with really sensitive or potentially harmful to the organization? Okay. Let's take a look at where that might be. Alrighty, so I've got my report listed up here. I'm going to point out I'm not using the Power BI Pro for this particular example. So this is not tied to my organization. But if this was something that I published up right here under that sensitivity, that is where I would see, and I could classify this document as being, very confidential. And if so, it would, because that information is present there, all the data would be considered confidential. And whatever rules and privileges I set up in my 365 account related to document sensitivity would be respected inside of this dashboard. And if the user came and they exported this dashboard once it's been published, any exports from that would also carry the same sensitivity label listed. But unfortunately, most folks don't use those sensitivity labels. And I really don't know why, because there's a lot of really good security improvements that can come from using that. Alrighty. For our next section, let's go ahead and talk about DAX, data analysis expressions. And we're not going to go crazy deep into DAX, but I want to make you aware of what this tool can use and how you would use it. And unfortunately, with respect to DAX, it is definitely one of the least understood things about Power BI. Okay. And it's not just with Power BI, it is also with Power Pivot. Really, it is the language, function language we use when we want to create custom calculations inside of Power BI. So what it does is it modifies the data that is stored in the Power BI data model. Okay. And then we'll create whatever calculation we might need. And it's not complicated. There's definitely some gotchas that you should know about. It's kind of a combination between Excel's standard formula language, like VLOOKUP, index match, and what we actually do when we're writing code for databases, which is SQL, structured query language. Okay. Now I'm going to preface this with, if you're not really familiar with SQL and you're looking to learn more, DAX is a great entrance into working with databases. Again, it's kind of quasi, you got a foot in both lands there. So it's a great way of getting started with more advanced features inside of the database world. Okay. Now I'm going to point out here, this is an optional. So, I mean, you have to learn this. If you want to do any sort of calculations inside of Power BI, they have to be written inside of DAX. And while it can't seem confusing at first, it doesn't really take long to actually be able to master this language. And there's a lot of really kind of common things with Excel that you can do with it. And there's also some important distinctions as well. Now, the absolute best resource I can point you to learn DAX is this website, dax.guide, dax.guide. It is a super useful tool. It goes into the ins and outs of the DAX language really well. We're just going to do a really simple example here today, creating calculated measures and columns, but this would be where I would go and point you to if you wanted to learn a little bit more about DAX. Okay. And with that, why don't we go ahead and have our second review question. Alrighty, what does the acronym DAX represent? Does it represent Developer API? No, it does not. Digital Access Exchange? No way, Jose. Digital Art Exchange? Nope. Correct answer here is data analysis expressions. All right. So if you're just getting started with DAX, don't fret. It's not too difficult. It's got a lot of things in common with Excel. They're both expression languages, meaning whatever you write is what you get. What you see is what you get with these things. There are a lot of functions like sum and count. They have the same name. They have the same functionality. They work exactly the same way. Okay. There are other commonalities, like they both start with equal signs. They both use vector and array formulas to work. Okay. So it's not difficult. Now, there are a couple of differences, though, with Excel formulas. Now, DAX take different types of inputs, and therefore return different types of data. Dax, for example, when you make a calculation, it does the calculation across the entire column. There's no way in Dax, for example, to say, well, do this calculation for rows 1 through 6 and then do a different calculation for rows 7 through 10. It just doesn't work that way. When you do a calculation inside of Dax, you're doing it for the entire data set. So when we reference something, we're actually referencing the whole column, okay? We usually will reference the table as well as the column, and using that, it's going to do the calculation across the entire object, not just a cell. It's not a cellular reference language. It's a column reference language. So when you start to do calculations inside of Power BI, just be aware you got to do them for the whole table or for the whole column, okay? Now, the most often thing that we're doing inside of Power BI for calculations, we're creating calculated columns or we're creating calculated measures. I'm going to do both here in a second just so you can kind of see what they look like. But you use them both. One's a Phillips head screwdriver. The other one is a flathead. It's not that one's better than the other. It just depends on what you're doing and what one is the appropriate option for the project you're working on. But we can create a calculated column. And what this does is it creates a calculation row by row in the data view. And it creates that calculation at every row of the actual data itself. Now, what's nice about this is that you get that record at every single row. So if you had orders, order 1, 2, 3, 4, that calculated column would be for order 1, 2, 3, 4. You'd see it everywhere. Couple downsides with this, it does require more file space because it is storing an additional value. It does take more computing time because, again, it's having to create a calculation in every row. And I will typically recommend you use calculated columns for data that does not change. So for example, imputing sales tax on a per row for your data set, or calculating extended prices, which what we're going to do today is a good option because, again, that's not really going to change that often. Okay, but again, the thing you should take back with calculated row, it creates that calculation at every single row with that calculated column. Now we have calculated measures. With calculated measures, what we're doing here is that we are creating a measure that will create let's call it a moment in time calculation. Okay. And so this gets calculated when the data model is being executed. And so, like, for example, we could do a calculation for total sales. It goes to where the sales are and it calculates everything and returns one number. So if we needed to use a KPI, if we needed to use a single point in time number, that's when we're going to use that measure. It doesn't create a row or a column at every row. It just creates a snapshot and just does all the math all at once. Okay. Benefits of this, it doesn't really increase the file size, does require computational resources to do, but really it's faster and it takes less data. So we typically want to use this for data that will change often and will typically need further analysis. Okay. And we'll create that example as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like to create a calculated column and a calculated measure. All right, so we are in here. We are in our Northwind sample database and our dashboard, and we're going to come down over here to our our data view. And from our data view on the right-hand side under our fields section, we're going to see the different fields that are present. And these are just the tables and, again, the columns inside of those various tables. And we're going to work with our order details one. And if you look here, you're not going to see something that gives you the total price. Okay. We could see, for example, for order 30 here, okay, they bought product 34 and they bought 100 of them at $14 a piece. But I don't see something over here that would give me quantity times unit price, which is something we would typically call extended price, which is the line item total for that, this times this. So we want to create a calculation that will put that in place for us. And so what we're going to do from our column tools is select new column, or we could come on over here from our home tab and select new column. Either way, we choose it. And we're going to go ahead and select that option. And from this option, we are going to now create a new column. And so we're going to call this one extended price. And you'll notice when I go to created this, I backed all the way to the beginning of this input here, and we're going to give it a name. And so we're going to define the name equal sign into the formula that we'd like to use. So we're going to call this one extended price. Okay, and then we're going to come to the other side of the equals, and we're going to go ahead and type out what we'd like it to be. Now, as we start to type, we're going to use square brackets to represent the specific column that we'd like it to be. And we can use that autocomplete. So it knows, for example, when I use that open bracket, that I'm looking to get something in this table. Okay, so we'll come down here. We're going to go ahead and choose our quantity, and we're going to hit tab to autocomplete. We're going to use an asterisk. We're going to use another open column, and we're going to use price, unit price here. And we're going to go ahead and hit the check mark here. That's going to go ahead and create that new column. Okay, and so that is the calculated column. It creates a new column at every row of the data with that calculations in play. Okay. So if we ever need to create a new column that's present, if we wanted to analyze stuff in the context of each row, that is where that calculated column can be really helpful. Now, let's say we just wanted to go and create a calculation across this entire data set that just summed everything, and just gave us the amount, all total sales. Well, that is where a measure can come in. Okay. So we're going to click this new measure button here, and that's present throughout the whole application. And we're going to come over here and we're going to say, let's call this one total sales. And for the formula, we're just going to use our good old-fashioned sum. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to do an open bracket, and we're going to go ahead and do our quantity times unit price again. Okay, and we'll do our close brackets, and it's yelling at me, so I'm not sure why. Okay. You know what? Here, let's make this easy. We'll actually do the total sum on our calculated column. So we'll do that, and we'll do that based off of extended price. Let's try that one more time. Come on. Sometimes doing these things on the fly can be fun. All right, and we'll do, oh man. What am I doing wrong here? Let's kill you. Delete from model, okay. All right, let's try that one more time. New measure. All right, we're gonna do total sales. All right, and extended price like that. Hopefully it takes that. Oh, I don't know why it's not doing that. Okay, and what am I doing wrong here? Well, the syntax language for this would be the exact same. We just give it a function, and unfortunately, in the interest of time, I'm probably not going to be able to fix this, and I'm not sure why it's not coming here. But let me try this one more time. Sum. Oh, you know what? I bet it was, yeah, order details. Yes, I needed to reference the name of the table. That's a good point. Okay. Okay, something like this where you actually have to reference the name of the table. And so let's actually just, to make this calculate correctly, so let's just do our extended price like that. So that's one of the differences there, and that was the issue. Let's call this one total sales again. I didn't reference the name of the table. Okay, so in this instance, we're calling this one total sales. We're giving it the sum function. And then notice over here that we've got order details in single quotes, and then a square bracket for the extended price. And when we do this, Okay, that creates that I'm sorry, not the quick measure, but the normal measure here. And from that normal measure, now we can pull, like, for example, our total sales in. Let me just do this as a separate KPI. All right, so let's just go ahead and create there we go, and we'll turn this into a card, and that gets us our total sales. So that measure is doing all those calculations on the fly. Okay, so that's how that works. The calculated column adds us as a column here, and when we do that measure, it just does a point in time. It just does the total of whatever operation we're looking to do. Alrighty, and we're getting close to the end here. We've got about 5 minutes left. Now, if you saw me fumble with that, I'm sorry. I'm doing this stuff on the fly sometimes, and I rehearse it and test it, but sometimes it can be a little difficult to get it all working correctly. But thank you for your patience. All right. Now, if you think writing some of these formulas can be difficult, you're probably right. It certainly can be. And one of the things I'll point out is an easier way is to use that quick measures, which we took a look at here at the beginning. Now, quick measures take some of the headache of having to write these formulas away. So, for example, it will do running totals. It could do calculations. They're basically pre-built, and there's no DAX necessary to be able to build them. When you go to create a quick measure, it prompts you for the data. There's a couple of different types here. You can do aggregation based off of categories. You can do filter. You can do time intelligence. So like this week, last week, this year, year to date, so on and so forth. And what it does is it basically just writes those DAX functions for you and just does it on the fly. Now, where I often will end up using these DAX quick measures is where I showed you originally. I like to come on over here in the fields section in the visualization, and I can access it by selecting just the, in this particular instance, selecting total sales here and creating that quick measure. You can also access it a few other places. It's over here under the home. You'll see quick measure listed here. And if you're in the data view listed, you'll also see it under your measure tools under quick measure. And from here, you could, for example, go and select something. Let's say our order details and our extended price here. And this is where you can start to do some different calculations. So averaging, variance, min, max, so on and so forth. Where you could, do different types of intelligence as well. So you could say year to date, quarter to date, month to date. And so if we selected one of these items here, it would create the necessary DAX code and then add that to our data model as something else that we can report upon. So if you're looking to do some calculations and you don't necessarily want to have to write all the formulas yourself, although it isn't complete, it doesn't necessarily have every little bit. It does have the necessary components for you. It does have the time intelligence, the aggregation, the filtering by type. Those are present as well. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and have our third and final review question, and then I'm going to finish with just a couple of additional tools to be familiar with. All right, what's the main difference between a calculated measure and a calculated column? Alrighty, so a measure calculates everything at once, while a calculated column calculates for every row. That is correct. A calculated measure is more efficient with disk space than a calculated column. That is also correct. Reason being is that it doesn't have to store every single row with a record. It just does it all in stores one value. A calculated measure is good for volatile data, which changes frequently, while a calculated column is good for timeless long-term data. That is also correct. And the correct answer here is all of the above. Alrighty, so unfortunately we are just about out of time here. I'm just going to briefly mention a few other components that you might want to consider. One is this Q&A function. What's really kind of cool about this is that this is the fastest way to get data out of Power BI. It's something that you need to enable. And once it's enabled inside your actual report, your users can type natural language questions to Power BI, and Power BI can answer them for them. And will produce charts and graphs respective of what they've asked for. So you could say like, hey, what sales unit has the highest revenue? Show me the top 10 products by year by sales. Show me, specific product categories in a pie chart. Show me sales trends over time. What's really kind of cool about this, and we'll explore it in a future episode in this series, is that it allows your users to self-service. Another recent introduction of feature for Power BI here, is the fact that you can integrate it with Microsoft Teams. So Teams, a fabulous tool. Check out cpetoday.com. We got a lot of courses just on Teams. But in a nutshell, it's video conferencing. It is chat. It's everything. And with Power BI, you can add interactive reports to Teams directly inside of that application. So you can bring your visualizations to where people are talking. But I will point out what's sad about this is it does require that premium license to be able to use. Okay. And the last thing I want to point out to you is the fact that Power BI is changing all the time. There are lots of third-party tools and solutions that you could choose to use, and it also updates every single month. They've adding features and functions seemingly all the time for different things that they want to bring to the platform. So please remember to keep your Power BI up to date. Alrighty. So a question did pop up in here. Okay. And so the question is, when you do a filter, how can you make sure the column total changes accordingly? Alrighty. So when I do a filter, how does the column total change? Okay. So really you need to understand here, and this came in from that there are different types of filters depending on what you're doing. You can do a filter on a report, you can do a filter on a page, and you can do a filter on the actual visualization that you're working with. Notice that when I don't have anything selected on my filter tabs here, we have filters on page, filters on all pages. But as I select something, we start to get other visualizations that pop up here. Okay. Now, one of the most common filters, Tracy, that a lot of folks use, myself included quite often, are slicers. So let's go ahead and add a category here, and let's just go ahead and change this from a table, and let's just go ahead and change this to a filter. Okay. So what we would want to be able to do here is ensure that when we select these different filter options, that the filter is being applied on the page. Or wherever we'd like to see that filter applied to. So like, for example, here, since I applied it across the entire data set, as I change things, you will see that it applies to every single thing. Where often people get kind of screwed up is they'll come to a specific visualization here and they will filter just on that one visualization, which then when they go to change other things inside their report, it won't update correctly. So Tracy, what I would recommend for you is I would recommend that you ensure that your filter is set to the right level. So in this case, it could probably be across the whole report rather than maybe on that one specific visualization. But I am going to go ahead and give you my contact info, and I'd love to connect with you after our podcast here today, and we can take a look at that specifically. Okay. So feel free to reach out, and I would love to take a look at that report. And for anybody else who comes, please, feel free. You can always reach out, and I'd be happy to take a look at your report or anything else you might have issues with. Alrighty, folks, that does bring us to the end of our broadcast for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention.